The moment my husband's girlfriend sent me a LinkedIn connection request, I almost laughed out loud, not because it was funny, because she had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. Let me take you back to where this actually started. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those grey Vancouver days where the mountains disappear behind cloud and the whole city feels muffled. I was sitting at a kitchen island with my second coffee, going through emails, when my phone buzzed with a notification, a connection request. Her name was Natalie. Her profile photo showed a woman maybe 10 years younger than me, standing in front of what I recognized immediately as the lobby of my husband's office building in downtown Vancouver. Her title read, Senior Partnerships Manager, Whitmore Capital Group. My husband's company. I accepted the request. Then I sat very still for a long time. I want to be honest with you about something. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call my best friend or drive to my mother's house or do any of the things you might expect. I just sat there with my coffee going cold, and something settled into place inside me like a deadbolt sliding home. Because here's what Natalie didn't know, what my husband Gordon didn't know, what nobody except my notary and my financial advisor knew, was that I had been preparing for exactly this moment for almost 7 years. Let me explain what I mean by that. My name is Vivienne. I'm 41 years old. I grew up in Kelowna, the younger of 2 daughters, and my mother raised us alone after my father left when I was 9. She worked as a bookkeeper for a small construction company for 30 years. She was precise and unsentimental about money in a way that some people found cold, but that I came to understand as a form of love. When I turned 18, she sat me down at the same kitchen table where she'd done the company payroll every Friday night, and she said to me, Vivienne, a woman should always know where her money is. Not where she thinks it is, where it actually is. Those are 2 very different things. I married Gordon when I was 28. He was charming and ambitious, and he made me feel, for a while, like I was the most interesting person in any room. We met at a fundraising dinner for the Vancouver Aquarium. He was there with clients. I was there with a colleague from the arts nonprofit where I worked. He sent a bottle of wine to our table. I thought it was obnoxious. I told him so. He found that hilarious. We were engaged 11 months later. The first few years were genuinely good. I won't pretend otherwise. We bought a house in Kitsilano, a beautiful old craftsman on a corner lot with a Japanese maple in the front yard. Gordon's company was growing fast. He'd founded Whitmore Capital Group with a university friend, a mid-sized private equity firm that did well enough that by our 5th anniversary we were looking at vacation properties on Salt Spring Island. I left my nonprofit job when our daughter was born. Gordon made enough that it made sense, and I wanted to be home with her. But I didn't stop paying attention. That was my mother's voice, always in the back of my head. Know where your money actually is. When my daughter was 2, I noticed something small. A weekend trip to Calgary that Gordon said was for work, that his assistant, when I happened to call the office to ask about dinner reservations on the Friday, had no record of. It was nothing I could prove. Just a small cold draft under a door I hadn't thought to check before. I didn't confront him. I called my mother instead. She listened without interrupting, and then she said, What are you going to do? I said I didn't know yet. She said, Then don't do anything yet, but don't do nothing. So I started paying very close attention. Over the next several months, I began quietly educating myself. I took a course in financial literacy through UBC's continuing education program, partly because I was genuinely interested and partly because I needed a framework for what I was looking at. I hired a fee-only financial advisor named Patricia. No, I'm sorry, I keep starting to use her real name. I hired a financial advisor through a referral from my mother's old colleague, a woman who specialized in working with women going through major life transitions. She didn't push products. She just helped me understand what I had, what I was entitled to, and what I should be thinking about. Here's what I learned about our situation in British Columbia under the Family Law Act. Property that you bring into a marriage or inherit during it can be classified differently from family property accumulated together. But the family home and appreciation on assets, that's almost always shared. The business, because Gordon had founded it before we married, was trickier. His corporate structure was set up in a way that obscured a lot. I spent about 6 months just understanding what we actually owned and what was held where. And then I started making decisions. Not dramatic decisions, quiet ones. I had a small inheritance from my grandmother, about $42,000 that had been sitting in a joint savings account. I moved it into an individual TFSA in my own name. I started contributing to my own RRSP from the household account, which I was fully entitled to do. I made sure that my name was on the deed of the Salt Spring property, which it wasn't yet. We'd been meaning to add it and kept putting it off. I stopped putting it off. I want to be clear, I wasn't hiding anything. Every single thing I did was legal, transparent in the sense that it appeared on tax returns and financial statements. I just made sure that what was mine was documented as mine. I want you to imagine it as tidying a room. I was simply making sure everything that belonged to me was on my shelf, properly labeled. Gordon noticed nothing. This told me something about how little he paid attention to the details of our financial life, which he had always considered his domain. The years passed. My daughter grew up and started school. I got involved with a local community land trust, eventually joining their board. Gordon's company kept growing. We had a good life on the surface. Dinners with friends, summer trips to the island, the house in Kitsilano that the neighbors always complimented. And then about 2 years ago, things started shifting in ways I couldn't ignore. Gordon started traveling more. His phone stayed face down on the counter. He started going to the gym at strange hours. I recognized the pattern because I've been watching for it for years, the way you watch the sky when you know a storm is possible. I didn't say anything yet. I hired a family law lawyer for a single 2-hour consultation just to understand where I stood. She walked me through the Family Law Act framework, the treatment of family property, what the process would look like. I paid her fee out of my own account, and I drove home in the rain feeling very calm and very clear. Last spring, I found out her name. My husband's assistant. He'd hired a new one, a young man named James who genuinely didn't know not to forward certain calendar invitations to the shared household account I still technically had access to, sent a dinner reservation confirmation to my inbox instead of Gordon's. The restaurant was Bell House in Gastown. The reservation was for 2. Gordon had told me he had a client dinner at Cincinnati. I didn't go to the restaurant. I didn't need to. I did what my lawyer had told me to do. If I ever found myself at this point, I took a screenshot. I saved it. I sent a copy to a secure email account I'd set up for exactly this purpose, and I called my lawyer's office the next morning to schedule a proper meeting. That was when I found out about Natalie. My lawyer had connections, and what I learned was that Natalie had been given a title at Whitmore Capital Group 6 months earlier that had no clear job description attached to it. She had been brought on at a salary that, when I later saw it on the corporate financial disclosure my lawyer requested, made my jaw tighten. She was being paid out of the company, our family property, effectively. This changed things. In British Columbia, if a spouse uses family assets or company assets that have family property implications to support a romantic partner, it can be considered dissipation of family property. My lawyer explained this carefully. We would need documentation, we would need financial records, we would need to demonstrate the pattern. But it was there. The foundation was there. I spent the next 3 months gathering, not confronting. Gathering. I want to tell you about the day Gordon told me he wanted a separation, because the look on his face when he said it is something I will remember for the rest of my life. It was a Sunday. Our daughter was at a friend's house. He sat down across from me at the kitchen island, the same island where I'd gotten that LinkedIn notification 8 months earlier, and he had a look on his face that I recognized as rehearsed. He had practiced this. He said he thought we'd grown apart. He said he thought we both deserved to be happy. He said he thought, given the circumstances, it would make sense for him to buy me out of the house, keep the Salt Spring property himself since it was really more his project anyway, and that the company was obviously his, that he'd make sure I was taken care of, that I'd be comfortable. I looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then I said, I think we should both get our lawyers involved. He nodded. He looked relieved. He thought I was being reasonable. 2 weeks later, his lawyer received the first financial disclosure package from my side. I wasn't there, obviously, but my lawyer told me afterward that there was a very long silence on the phone when his lawyer called to discuss it. Here's what Gordon had apparently not considered or had simply not bothered to check. The Salt Spring property was in both our names, had been for 6 years. The house in Kitsilano was family property and would be divided accordingly under the Family Law Act, with full credit for the appreciated value, which had more than tripled since we bought it. The $42,000 inheritance that he might have assumed was still sitting in a joint account had been in a TFSA in my name since our daughter was in kindergarten and was now worth considerably more. My RSP contributions over the years, made from household income which is treated as joint income, represented a significant asset in my name, and my lawyer had filed a detailed affidavit outlining the compensation paid to Natalie from the company's operating funds, with documentation, which opened a claim for dissipation of family property. He had walked into that separation conversation thinking he held all the cards. He had, it turned out, been shuffling a deck that was mostly mine. The mediation process in BC can take months. Ours took just under a year. I won't walk you through every session because some of it was genuinely tedious and some of it was painful in ways I wasn't expecting. There was a moment, somewhere around month 3, sitting across a conference table from Gordon and watching him refuse to make eye contact, when I felt something I can only describe as grief, not for him exactly, for the person I had been when I married him, for the version of my life that had seemed so solid and turned out to have been built on sand that only I had thought to check. But I want to tell you about the final settlement conference because that's where everything became real. We were in a meeting room at a law office in downtown Vancouver, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the harbor. Gordon had brought his business partner, who was also a close friend, as a support person. He came in looking confident. His lawyer had indicated in pre-conference communications a number in mind for a settlement that he considered fair. My lawyer presented our position first. When the full picture of the family property, the Kitsilano house, the Salt Spring property, the dissipation claim, my registered accounts, the full financial disclosure, was laid out, Gordon's business partner made a sound that was almost involuntary. A small, sharp breath. Gordon stared at the table. His lawyer began writing something very quickly on a notepad. Gordon looked up at me. I think he was looking for something, anger maybe, or tears, the thing he had expected. I don't know. I looked back at him calmly. I was thinking about my mother sitting at her kitchen table every Friday night with the payroll ledger. I was thinking about that conversation when I turned 18. The settlement we reached that afternoon was fair. It was genuinely fair, not punitive, because that wasn't what I was after. I got an equalization payment that reflected the true value of the family property, including the Salt Spring property he had believed was essentially his. I retained my registered accounts in full. The dissipation claim was resolved with a payment that acknowledged what had been taken from the family's resources. Gordon kept the company, which had always been his in origin, but he paid dearly for the clean separation. I kept the house in Kitsilano. In the months after the settlement, I did some things I'd been thinking about for a long time. I joined the board of a financial literacy nonprofit that works with women going through separation. I started volunteering on Saturday mornings with a program that helps women understand their rights under the Family Law Act, not legal advice, just information, the kind of basic framework that I hadn't had until I went looking for it. My mother came to Vancouver for 2 weeks last summer, and we sat on the back porch of the Kitsilano house, and she asked me how I was doing, really doing, and I told her the truth. I was okay. Better than okay. She nodded. She said, I taught you to know where your money was. I didn't teach you to be suspicious. You did that yourself. I said, I learned it from you. She shook her head. No, I was afraid you were careful. Those are different things. I've thought about that a lot since then. There is one more thing I want to tell you because it's the part people always ask about when they hear this story. About 4 months after the settlement, I received a message on LinkedIn. It was from Natalie. It was 3 sentences long. She said she wanted me to know that things with Gordon had ended. She said she thought I deserved to hear it. She said she was sorry. I read it twice. Then I closed the app and didn't reply. What was there to say? She had thought she was the player in this story. She had thought I was the obstacle to be removed. Neither of us had understood the game correctly, but I had understood it first, and I had prepared, and in the end, the only thing that actually protected me was something that had nothing to do with her at all. It was 7 years of paying attention. It was a woman I'd never properly thanked, who had once run payroll at a construction company in Kelowna and sat her daughter down at a kitchen table to tell her a single true thing. My daughter is 9 now. She's curious and funny, and she has her great-grandmother's stubbornness, which I consider a gift. Someday, when she's old enough, I'll sit her down at the kitchen island in the house in Kitsilano. Our house, my house, hers someday, and I'll tell her what my mother told me. Not because I want her to be suspicious, because I want her to be careful. Because I want her to know exactly where everything is and whose name is on what and why that matters. Those are different things. My mother was right about that, but she was also right about the rest of it. I've been thinking lately about what actually made the difference. Not the legal strategy, not the documents, not even the financial advisor. Those things mattered, but they were all downstream of something simpler and harder to name. My mother wasn't a wealthy woman. She wasn't powerful in any obvious way. She sat at a kitchen table in Kelowna every Friday night and did other people's payroll, and she raised 2 daughters on what that paid her, and she never once complained about it in front of us. What she did instead was teach me to look clearly at things, not with suspicion, with honesty. Those really are different, and I didn't fully understand the difference until I was sitting across a conference table from Gordon, watching his lawyer write very quickly on a notepad. Suspicion is reactive. It comes from fear, and it makes you small. What my mother gave me was something quieter. The habit of paying attention before you need to, of understanding your own situation without waiting for a crisis to force you to look. That's not cynicism. That's just being a grown adult who takes her own life seriously. I think about Natalie sometimes, not with anger, genuinely, not with anger. She thought she understood the situation. She had assessed the players and decided I was the obstacle, the outdated version, the one being left behind. She wasn't malicious so much as she was careless. She hadn't done the work of actually looking. And that carelessness had consequences, not because the universe punishes the careless in some tidy narrative way, but because when you don't look clearly at reality, reality eventually corrects you. Gordon made the same mistake. He had decided somewhere along the way that I wasn't paying attention. That assumption cost him. The choices I made over those 7 years weren't dramatic. I took a continuing education course. I opened a TFSA. I made sure my name was on a property deed. I had 1 2-hour consultation with a lawyer before I ever needed one. None of it was heroic. It was just consistent, showing up for the small, unglamorous tasks months after month, because I understood that how things turn out is mostly determined by what you do before the crisis, not during it. That kind of endurance, just staying steady and clear-eyed through years of ordinary life, that's what I'm most proud of, honestly. Not the settlement number. The years of showing up quietly before there was anything to show up for. And there's something about integrity in all of this that I keep coming back to. Everything I did was legal and transparent. I didn't hide assets, I documented mine. I didn't scheme. I prepared. That distinction matters to me. Not because I needed to feel like the good person in the story, but because I have a daughter who is 9 years old and who is watching how I move through the world. I wanted to be able to look at her without flinching. I wanted the outcome to be something I'd earned cleanly, something I could explain to her someday without softening the edges. She'll sit at that kitchen island eventually. I'll tell her what my grandmother understood and what my mother carried forward and what I spent 7 years learning to live by, not as a warning, as a gift. Know where everything is. Do the quiet work before you need to. Be someone your own daughter could learn from. That's the whole lesson, really. Everything else followed from that.